I enjoyed it, but it started off the performance with my report card from my just about the middle of junior high school in Washington, and uh, from there it gets better. we started at the low point, or Peter did, and he changes it a little every time I watch. And one time out in Los Angeles, I performed with him. I had my ukulele with me, and for some reason he hasn't asked me back to do that. But I look forward to attending any of his performances. Well, I probably developed a great many of my ideas from my dad. That all three of his children just loved him unconditionally as he loved us, and he was not a preacher to us in any way, shape, or form. But we picked up things from a little bit of what he said, but mostly how he acted, and the idea that all lives have equal value is something that I think both of my sisters, as well as I, felt since I can remember. I talk sometimes about the ovarian lottery, and the truth is that I'm here in my position as a matter of luck. I mean, that was the most important thing that happened to me, was the womb from which I came, the parents I had, the wiring I had, and I didn't have anything to do with that. My dad talked at the dinner table about that famous lynching that took place. It was around 1920, plus or minus a couple of years, and my dad went down and saw a mob out of control. There was a very famous editorial written in the Omaha World Herald subsequently, may have won a Pulitzer, I'm not sure, about mob rule, and my dad would talk to all of us at the dinner table about what happens when mob thinking takes over. It obviously applied in that lynching, but it applied plenty of other places too. I didn't really have memories of segregation in Omaha, but when we moved to Washington, I went to Alice Neal Junior High School, and just a few blocks, maybe less than that, away, there was a school for black children, and I had some good friends there, actually, who were black. One of the paper boys I used to associate with, and I caddied at the Chevy Chase Country Club. I was the only white caddy there. I wasn't worth beating up, fortunately. If there'd been more of us, I think there'd been more trouble. But so I saw what was going on. I saw a little bit in Fredericksburg, Virginia, too, in the movie theater there. The blacks sat in a different section than whites, so it never made sense to me. Well, I helped a bit when that was in the '60s, when there was fair housing legislation in Lincoln. My wife was more active than I was, though. She constantly worked. There was a group she worked with where there was a Jew and a black, and she was the WASP, and they went around and made presentations at various clubs and that sort of thing. And so she was more active than I was, but I was 100% with her mentally. I was just working a little more on my own investments. There was an incident at the end of the 1960s where I was going to join what had been an all-Jewish country club, and that created quite a ruckus there for a couple of months, and then after it took place, then everything straightened out. The club that I'd belonged to that had turned down a Jewish friend of mine, which made me quite irritated, and was the cause for me to join the Jewish club. What existed in whatever it was, 1969, a few years later just changed dramatically in that respect. But I remember when Bob Gibson, who was the terrific baseball player, and they have something in Omaha called the Exarban Ball, which was a very, very big deal in the past. Still is a big deal, but it was a much bigger deal then. And 8,000 or 10,000 people would gather at the Exarban Auditorium for something of a civic nature and social nature, and there wasn't a black face there. And then finally they invited Bob's one or two of his daughters to participate, and that was a big event. That was a big change in the mid-'70s. There's a lot of progress that's still needed, but I've seen progress take place in my lifetime, both probably more with females than with blacks. I've seen anti-Semitism drop dramatically in Omaha. Now, maybe people just don't talk to me about it when they feel that way now. But I was a member of the Rotary Club in the 1960s, and finally they put me on some secret membership committee, and I learned what some of the people on that committee thought about how they made selections, and it was amazing to me that in Omaha, Nebraska in the 1960s that people would say, well, we've got enough Jews or something like that. Well, when I got out of business school at Columbia, I had a hero there named Ben Graham who did wonders for me in all kinds of ways in my life. But when I got out of school, I said, could I go to work for you for nothing? I was sort of hoping that if he said yes, he would then decide to pay me. And he told me that his little firm, which only employed about 6 or 7 people, that there was so much prejudice then in Wall Street. And Wall Street was divided then between Jewish firms and Gentile firms. I mean, there were a couple like Kuhn Loeb maybe that were known as Jewish firms, and there would be others that were known totally as Gentile firms. And Ben said that because that prejudice existed and he'd experienced it, that he felt that to the extent that they had any employment to offer with 6 or 7 people, that they had hired up to that point only Jews. So I came out to Omaha and sold stocks and said, but I kept pestering them for a while, and a few years later they hired me. I was the first Gentile hired. I remember that speech that Martin Luther King gave, I think it was in the fall of 1967. That was one of the most inspiring speeches I've ever heard. And I just, maybe in the last, I tried to get a copy for many, many years. And finally, about a year or two ago, a fellow who now runs Morehouse found a copy and sent it to me. And when I read it today, I think it's even better than when I heard it. I mean, it's a remarkable speech. No, I knew about King. I mean, but it was different knowing about King and listening to King. It took me right out of my seat. My wife was with me, and we both had the same experience. And of course, 6 months later, he was dead. It was interesting. In that speech, he talked about truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne, but that scaffold sways the future. Well, he was going to be dead in 6 months, but that scaffold did sway the future. The genes must have gone bad, I guess. I grew up. We couldn't sit around the dinner table. They wouldn't let me eat my hamburger until we'd said a few bad things about Roosevelt. So it was a very Republican household. Of course, my dad got elected as Republican. I campaigned for him. My sisters campaigned for him. So I even ran for as a delegate to the Republican National Convention in 1960 for reasons that were sort of unrelated to the normal political reasons. I waited until after my dad died before I changed my registration. I didn't see any reason to do it, but I changed my ideas, and not in one fell swoop, but I changed my ideas in the years preceding 1964 when he died. I was president of the Young Republicans Club at the University of Pennsylvania and was going to ride an elephant down Woodland Avenue when Dewey won, but there went my moment of fame when the Illinois returns came in. Civil rights changed my views. I just felt that the Democratic, on balance, neither party cared very much about it there for a while, but I felt that the Democratic Party was more likely to do something about it. It just struck me as fundamentally wrong that almost 200 years after this country was born, that in 1776, Thomas Jefferson wrote all men are created equal, and then when they wrote the Constitution, they all of a sudden decided that, no, it was just 3/5 of a person if you were black. I mean, that struck me as kind of crazy. And of course, in Article 2, Section 1, they use male pronouns in terms of describing the presidency. They don't do it with the House of Representatives or the Senate or the judiciary, but they sort of slipped up, and their true feelings came out in that article, which it's really remarkable that it's hims and he's and all of that sort of thing. 13 years after the Declaration of Independence said otherwise. I voted for JFK, right. I didn't actively campaign for him. My dad was still alive then. My older sister was working very hard for Goldwater, so she started something or worked with it called Gold for Goldwater. So I didn't say we think we ought to have two branches of the family nullifying each other. Well, there's an interesting story on President Nixon, in that in 1940, my dad first got elected in 1942, and then in 1946, the Republicans won control of the House of Representatives for the first time since 1930. And one night, Joe Martin, who was to become Speaker of the House for the Republicans, came over to our house and told my dad that because of the Republican majority, there was an open seat on the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he offered it to my dad. And my dad said, no thanks, he wasn't interested in that seat. So then Joe Martin went to a newly elected congressman named Richard Nixon and offered it to him, and that's the way history develops. I've always been fascinated by politics, and politicians fascinate me. So Nixon was a very interesting character. He was a very smart man, and but he self-destructed. One of the interesting, probably the book I'd really like to read is Why Smart People Do Dumb Things. I've seen it all my life. I've seen it in finance, I've seen it in politics, I've seen it in marriages, all kinds of things. Why smart people do dumb things? Because Nixon destroyed himself. I was able to purchase Washington Post. I owe Nixon a great thank you, because I was able to buy Washington Post stock very cheap because Nixon had encouraged B.B. Rebozo, I believe, to challenge two licenses for TV stations that the Washington Post had in Florida, Jacksonville and Miami. And Washington Post stock took a quick nosedive from about $37 a share down to $16. And even if those two stations had been taken away, the stock was worth many multiples of the price it got to, and they weren't going to take it away anyway. So President Nixon did me a huge favor financially when he got BB to challenge those licenses. Well, Katharine Graham was a remarkable woman. I mean, she was the daughter of Eugene Meyer, who was a huge figure in Wall Street in Washington. I mean, he started in Wall Street with a very small sum and went on to become, he was actually chairman of the Fed. He was, I think, the first head of the RFC. I think he may have been the first head of the World Bank. He was a remarkable man. And he had 5 children, but Katharine Graham ended up being the heir to the Washington Post. Eugene Meyer had bought it in the early 30s, and it lost money year after year after year until it finally merged with the Times Herald around 1960. But Katharine Graham, she'd been intimidated about her business ability and a lot of other abilities, both by her mother and by her husband. And she had this idea that men were going to be better at business or anything related to it than women, but she also had an inner strength so when her husband died and she had the responsibility for either taking over the paper or just sitting back and collecting dividends from it, she gritted her teeth and stopped her knees from at least knocking so people could hear them, and said she was going to take on the job of running the Washington Post company. And she backed Ben Bradley, the editor of the Post, in the Watergate scandal at a time when politicians were opposing her, other news organizations were not picking up on it. The Washington Post was out there all by itself. It changed the world, that piece of journalism. She'd earlier done the same thing, actually, with the Pentagon Papers a couple of years earlier, in 1971, when Daniel Ellsberg came to the Post with the papers, and the New York Times, I think, had them first, but they were stopped from publishing to some extent. And Katharine Graham said to Ben Bradley, run the presses. You don't have much choice in terms of, if it's a choice between looking to the past and looking to the future, believe me, look to the future. I've really never been much for beating myself up over mistakes or anything of the sort. There's nothing you can do about it. The only thing you can change is the future. And I'm in a business where I'm going to make plenty of mistakes, and that just comes with the territory. And you move forward. Although when Kay Graham died, I was really hit. That was a terrible time. That's probably I never thought of it that way, but I think it's fair to say that I'm anti-elitist. I don't think people have any business thinking of themselves as elite. I mean, they may have been born with the potential for more IQ, or for that matter, able to kick a football further, or dance better than somebody else. But and they no doubt work to perfect their skills and all of that. But it really gets back to every human has equal value. And I could have been born. Well, when I was born in 1930. The odds were probably 40-1 against me being born in the United States. I did win the ovarian lottery on that first day, and on top of that, I was male. And if I'd been female, my life would have been far, far different. So put that down as another 50-50 shot, and now the odds are 80-1 against being born a male in the United States. And it was enormously important in my whole life, the fact that I was born in 1930 as a male in the United States. So to think that makes me superior to anyone else as a human being is just, to me, I can't follow that line of reasoning. Women, it's amazing that the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. So we went a very long time before we even got around to codifying that. But when I was born in 1930, I had sisters, one on each side, a couple of years each way, and they're just as smart as I am. They did not have the same shot in life. I mean, they were destined, without anybody saying it. My parents loved us all equally, but they did not have the same expectations for us. The teachers all felt the same about us in terms of wanting to help us and all of that sort of thing, but they were delivering messages, without knowing it, that told my sisters that their job was to marry well. And if they decided to go to work, that they should be either retail clerks or nurses or teachers or maybe secretaries, and that was it. So you had half the talent in the United States, half the talent that was told to sort of sit on the sidelines. And it always struck me as totally wrong. It made me realize how lucky I was that I was male. But on the other hand, you can look at the flip side of that and say it's quite encouraging, because if you look at what this country accomplished only using half of its talent, just think of the potential for the future. I'm enormously bullish on America over the future, and part of the reason is that we, by some rather stupid decisions that probably weren't even thought out that much. We've sort of inherited from thousands of years of male behavior, but we essentially put half our talent on the sidelines, and we're making a lot of progress on that now, but we've got a ways to go. It really doesn't make any difference to me, except for the fact that since I feel that women have gotten the short end of the stick for a long time, that if it's a 50-50 choice, I'd rather give the opportunity to the woman. I think that I'm lucky enough in life, I know I'm lucky enough in life, to be able to associate pretty much with whom I want to in business or socially or wherever. And I think it's sort of crazy. I think the ideal thing is to focus with people that are better than you are, because you will move in the direction of the people you associate with. And I advise students all of the time, marry up, marry somebody. It can't be done mathematically if everybody tries to do it, but your behavior will move in the direction of the people you associate with. And so why not associate with the best? I mean, I've had a number of heroes in life, and associating with them has done wonders for me. I wouldn't not have been the same person I would not have had the same fun in life if I'd been indiscriminate in terms of who I associate with over time. Well, you can start with my heroes. You start with my dad. You can move on to Ben Graham. You move on to my partner Charlie Munger. Kay Graham was definitely a hero of mine. My wives have been heroes in both cases. They've all done wonders for me, and basically not expected anything in return. I mean, I have these friends that they do 10 things for me, and they're thinking about doing the 11th rather than whether they're going to get one in return for me and from me. I've been lucky in life that I've never had a hero that's let me down. That would be a terrible experience to really have your belief in somebody that you sort of worshipped shattered, and it's never happened to me. Loyalty and my partner Charlie Munger in business, for example, we don't keep score, as to who's done the most work or anything of the sort, and in a marriage that's important. I mean, I had a fellow named Lorimer Davidson at Geico who spent 4 hours with me in a January day in 1951. He changed my life. He had no expectation he was going to get a thing from me, but I came there on a Saturday and banged on the door of what was then called Government Employees Insurance, now called Geico, and a janitor finally let me in, and he was the only one in the office, this fellow Lorimer Davidson, and he spent 4 hours with me giving me an education that literally did change my life. And you're very, very fortunate in life when you run into people like that. Ben Graham, I mean, he never asked anything of me. I mean, he just basically gave. I mean, he taught for 25 years or so at Columbia, and he was creating future competitors. I mean, I'm sure he didn't, if he took any money for it, he gave it right back to the school. But he basically was, as somebody said, he was planting trees that other people would sit under. And I've had a number of them like that. And it's been wonderful. Well, I like teaching, so it's a little unfair. It's like I'm making any sacrifice when I do it. I'm still at 84. I've got 40 schools that will come out this school year from all over, including outside the country. I have one school from Brazil that comes, and another one came from China. And a week or so ago, I had Harvard, but at the same time I had Western Ontario, and so I enjoy it. And at the start of every year, I kind of feel I'm not sure whether I want to do this again. As soon as I start talking to the students, I get energized because it's so much fun. Just looking at a bunch of people who got their futures ahead of them, they're forming ideas, they're forming behavior patterns, and they're eager to learn, and they come 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles to talk, and I probably get more out of it than they do. I let them ask any question they want to ask. I tell them, you throw them at my head. It'll be much more fun for me than if you deliver up softballs. So we can talk about investments or business, but we can talk about philanthropy, or we can talk about marriage, or we can talk about career. And I remember sometime back, there was a young woman from the University of Chicago, and the very first question I got from her was, "Do you have to be a bitch on wheels to succeed?" And I think I convinced her that she didn't, and my guess is she's succeeding now. So you get a lot of good feelings out of teaching. I started when I was 21. Well, I really want to talk to students, and if I talk to a bunch of 50 or 60-year-olds, they want two things. They want predictions and to be entertained. They're not going to change their behavior patterns at all. It's too late for them. Somebody once said the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they're too heavy to be broken. And by the time you're not going to, there's no great change that's going to take place. But with the students, it actually makes a difference. And I get letters from them that telling me how it makes a difference. It makes a difference maybe in who they marry or how they go into marriage in terms of the discussions that they have with their proposed spouses, all kinds of things about what they'll do in careers or whatever it may be. Who knows what comes out of it? But I do know, because I I hear from them, I do know that it changes their lives in some way. And I have a good time too. Well, the toughest thing I have to do is if I have to fire a manager. And we have no retirement age at Berkshire. So it isn't like at 65 I can say, you're just terrific, but we've got this rule. So when I tell somebody it's time for them to leave, they know I'm making a decision about them. And these people are my friends. And I do it myself in most cases, not all cases, but most cases. Certainly if they're friends of mine, I do it. And most of them are. I do it myself. And I would give a lot of money not to have to do that sort of thing, but that is my job. And capitalism at times can be very tough, and the market system can. It's a wonderful system, and it produces way more goods and services that people want than any other system will. But with given individuals, given industries, given companies, it can be brutal. And it's up to me to have the right person running a business. And sometimes that right person runs out of gas for one reason or another. Sometimes, I've had cases of Alzheimer's and other debilitating situations, and I get on a plane and fly, and one way or another tell them that their time is up, and they usually get, toward the end they're consoling me usually, because I feel so terrible about it, but it's not pleasant, but you have to make other tough decisions. There's no question about it. It's painful, and it'll always be painful, and on the other hand, I have to do it. And somebody will have to come and tell me, but I'll understand what they're going through. I tell my kids, tell me when I'm going gaga, but all three of you better come in, because if it's just one of you, you're out of the will. Oh, I think it's largely a blessing. That is when that's when you're making decisions. I like to sit and think, and I spend a lot of time doing that, and sometimes it's pretty unproductive, but I find it enjoyable to think about, particularly about business or investment problems. They're easy. It's the human problems that are the tough ones. Sometimes there aren't any good answers with human problems. There's almost always a good answer with money. Well, I think I think for most people, it's a pretty good to remember. I think it was Bertrand Russell's words, although I tried to look it up one time and I couldn't find them. But he said that success is getting what you want, and happiness is wanting what you get. And I would say the best measure of success for many people comes from a story. There was a woman here in Omaha, a Polish Jew, who went into a concentration camp during the war, went into a German operation where some of her family went in with her, and she was in one line, and her sister was in another line, and they didn't all come out. She went through terrible times. And when she was maybe 80, so I probably would have been 70, she said to me one day, she said, Warren, she said, I'm very slow to make friends, because when I look at somebody, I say to myself, would they hide me? And I would say that if you get to be 65 or 70 or 80, and you've got a lot of people that would hide you, you're a success. And it's really another way of saying a lot of people who really love you. And I would say that if you get to be that age, and people are holding testimonial dinners for you, if you write them a check or naming business schools after, whatever it may be, and nobody will hide you, I think you're a failure. And I know plenty of very wealthy people that their own kids wouldn't hide them. So I think if you're looking for one measure of success, just say to yourself, how many people would hide me? And there's a lot of people that have never accumulated a lot of money or anything, but there's all kinds of people that would do anything for them. And I feel that way about some people, and have felt that way. And your success then. No, I don't. I used to, when I was about 10 years old, I used to think about it a lot. But now, I've had a terrific life. I feel it's going to happen, and I have no idea what happens after it. I'm an agnostic, so it may be terribly interesting. It may not be interesting at all. We'll find out. But your body gets kind of tired after a while. Mine isn't quite there yet, but I think in another 20 years, I'm not sure I would want a lot more days after that. I'm having as good a time at 84 as I've ever had, but my body can't do the same things now that it could before. But fortunately, it doesn't make any difference in my activities. Someday it'll make a difference, and I would not want to stick around in a paralyzed state. Just take Joe Kennedy, for example. I would not want to exist that way. So I do not want to survive just to survive, and I've told my kids and my wife that just don't keep me alive just to keep a heart beating. Keep me alive as long as I'm enjoying life. Well, physically, I'm pretty well depreciated. I'm getting down to salvage value, but it doesn't really make any difference. I mean, I don't need hand-eye coordination. I don't need balance particularly or strength and so I'm not as strong as I was 5 years ago. I can't hit. I've gone out to do it, but I probably hit a golf ball, at best half the distance I could have hit it 10 years ago. But it really doesn't make any difference at all. It doesn't interfere with my work. It doesn't interfere with my happiness. It doesn't interfere with my thinking. It doesn't interfere with my friends. So I literally can say at 84, I may not be able to say it, a few more years, but I can say at 84 that the fact that my body isn't the same as it was earlier, it wasn't that great to start with. You're not looking at some guy that was a candidate for the Heisman or anything in the past. So I don't feel any diminution in my enjoyment of life or enthusiasm for life at all to this point. In fact, in a sense, the game that I'm in gets more interesting all the time. It's tough. The one part about growing old that's particularly tough is you lose more of your friends. I mean, that is tough. I just lost one last week, and Keogh, who was a wonderful friend. But aside from that, and that's important, but aside from that, I wake up every morning as excited about the day that's coming as I ever have in my life. I would not do as well on an IQ test as I would have 50 years ago. I can do mental arithmetic still pretty well, but not as good as I could when I was in my 20s or 30s. I read faster when I was younger. My memory is still pretty good for business facts and that sort of thing. But if I'd read a book when I was 25, I'd remember it better than if I read a book now. On the other hand, I've learned more about people over the years. So I'm better actually at things that involve people judgments than I would have been when I was in my 20s. But in terms of learning a new game, I wouldn't learn it as fast now. It used to be a game called Simon that you press various buttons and things out. Well, I was pretty good at that 40 years ago. If I took that up now and spent the same amount of time practicing on it, I wouldn't be nearly as good. I've learned all kinds of things about human behavior. It's very hard to describe all the various aspects of it, but I have seen, when I was 20, I hadn't seen that much of human behavior, but now I've experienced a lot, particularly in sort of a specialized field, and so I think I'm quite a bit better in terms of particularly with the extremes of human behavior. If you give me 100 people, I can't pick out the best one to run a business. Take out 100 graduates of a good business school or something. I can't pick out the best one, but if I hear from people who are selling a business or I associate with in some other way, I think I'm reasonably good at picking the ones that or predicting how they'll behave after they sell us the business or how they'll behave in other situations in the future. You still make mistakes. I have no regrets at all that I focused on. I got interested in stocks when I was probably 7 or something like that. I got interested in business when I was 6 or 7, and would it have been better if I'd focused on chess? No, Bobby Fischer would have killed me. If I'd focused on golf, it'd be a joke. So I happened to very early on learn sort of stumble into an area that I was going to be naturally good at, and I was better because I did stumble onto it early, and I was better because I focused on it. And obviously, if you're going to spend X hours a day on some particular activity, you're not going to do it on something else. But I never learned to ice skate. I don't miss it at all. There's all kinds of things, you get to pick what you spend your time on. If you're lucky, you get to pick. And I've been able to really decide my own calendar for the last 60 years, probably to a degree that almost be hard to top it anyway. And I'm glad I've made those choices. I get every day, and I've been doing this for decades, I get to work at what I love with people I love. If you take my assistant, Debbie Bosonic, there's nobody in the world I'd rather work with than her. And Charlie Munger, my partner, even though he's in Los Angeles, there's nobody I'd rather work with than Charlie, the managers we have. So I get to select the game, sort of how the game is going to be played, and I get to select the people who are going to be on my team. And if I'm associating with somebody that causes my stomach to churn, it's my fault because I don't have to do it. And I've arranged things that way to quite a degree. And I'm in a field where I can do that. If I was in government, I wouldn't be able to do it, or politics, or all kinds of things. But fortunately, I consider it the sort of ideal game. Well, I like things quiet. I shut the door actually at the office because I don't want to hear anybody talking outside, and I like to read a lot. I can't read as fast as I used to read, but I still probably spend 5 or 6 hours a day reading or thinking while I read. It's the kind of life I like. Somebody else with a different personality might like something much different, but I do know what I like, and I've managed to create an environment where I maximize it. Well, over the years, you develop a lot of filters, so you don't waste a lot of time on things. I always worry about sounding rude when people call me about a business, because usually in a minute or two I can tell whether it's going to make it through all the filters as to something I'm interested in. And I don't like to tell them that because they feel that if I just listen to them for an hour that I'll understand why they like it so well or something of the sort. So there are various shortcuts that you get, but I probably don't retain, I'm retaining a particular set of or collection of information, but other people are doing it in different ways. When I was a kid, I could have told you who was the starting lineup for 16 major league teams, but there were only 8 teams in each league, and they didn't trade their players around or anything. I can't tell you anybody now, but there are all kinds of people that can. They're just collecting different information than I'm collecting, and there are people that are carrying around absolutely as much information in their head as I am, but I happen to have it pretty well concentrated in a few areas, and I do know what I call my circle of competence. So I stay within that circle, and I don't worry about things that are outside that circle that other people may be able to capitalize or evaluate. It doesn't bother me that other people have skills that I don't have. Well, my circle of competence, which has grown to some degree, but circle of competence is the area in which certain kinds of industries, for example, I can understand the future economics of. Other kinds of industries I can't, and I have to know where the perimeter of that circle is. Now, over the years, I may be able to enlarge the circle somewhat, but the circle never gets to be all-encompassing. And Tom Watson Sr., who built IBM, said, I'm no genius, but I'm smart in spots and I stay around those spots. Well, he was talking about a circle of competence. And I see my partner Charlie says, it's wonderful to have a IQ of 180 as long as you don't think it's 200. And I have seen all kinds of very, very smart people self-destruct one way or another in business or particularly in the stock market. And they stray outside of their circle of competence just because they know they're very, very smart, but that doesn't mean they know everything. And defining what your game is, where you're going to have an edge, is enormously important. And I think both my partner Charlie and I have gotten reasonably good at that over the years. Well, greed takes run, but I would say envy does it probably as much as anything else. I mean, the reason they get greedy is because you sit there during an internet boom or something, and your next door neighbor, who you know is not as smart as you are, has just bought a new car because he did something he didn't understand, but it worked. And you say to yourself, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And I know I'm better than he is. Or maybe your spouse says to you, what's going on with the Joneses next door? You're smarter than he is, but they're driving newer cars. So envy's a big. I ran a firm on Wall Street for a short period of time, and I would pay somebody in their late 20s a couple $1 million. And this is 20 years ago when a couple million was even more than now. And they would be fine until they found the guy next to him, got 2.1 million. And then from that point forth, they were unhappy. So envy is a terribly destructive. Greed and envy get mixed up together. And the thing about envy, of course, is, as my partner Charlie says, of the 7 deadly sins. I mean, there's no upside to it. I mean, you can talk about gluttony, and at least it's kind of fun while you're eating, and you can talk about lust, and we know, there's some fun there. But envy, you make yourself feel terrible, and the other guy that you're envious of doesn't even feel it. Well, it's a game. I mean, it's a competitive game. It's a big game, and I enjoyed the game a lot. The money has utility up to a point, but that point was reached probably when I was in my early 30s. Beyond that point, money had no utility, but the game was a lot of fun, and the game has continued to be fun, and it does benefit other people. But I was born with wiring that in this kind of economy, at this time in our history, I'm going to make a lot of money if I work at it. It doesn't mean that I'm a superior human being or anything, but I wasn't born, so that I can win Dancing with the Stars. I mean, I can't come in second or third or fifth or 10th. I can come in last, and it was pure accident. But I was in the right place at the right time with the right wiring. If you were going to make money, and I realized that at some point, and I enjoyed it, the game, and it is a game that you don't have to, it's not like being a heavyweight boxer or or a baseball player or something. I mean, you can play that game a long, long time. I was smart, but I wasn't that smart. I was good at what I ended up doing, but I got a nickel a week allowance, and a nickel a week wasn't enough to satisfy my wants. So that I went into business very early, and I wasn't going to make more than a nickel a week unless I started selling Coca-Cola door to door. I sold gum door to door, or sold Saturday Evening Post, Liberty Magazine, Ladies Home Journal, you name it, and I enjoyed it. Well, I like Omaha, but I'm come from one of other places, but because I have friends, a lot of friends particularly on both coasts, and almost very convenient flying either way. I can be almost any place in 3 hours, and I like to see my friends, and I like action, but I like Omaha. I live 5 minutes from where I work, and that's been the situation now for 53 years, and I work with people a great group of people that make my life very easy and that take good care of me. And my grandchildren went to the same high school that my children went to, my wife went to, my dad went to, and my grandfather went to. Same public school, inner city, been integrated for 75 years. Charlie Munger went to the same school. And so there's a lot of continuity to it. There's a lot of friendships. The medical center's 5 minutes from the office, and at 84, maybe that's a little more important. And I know, I know the doctors. They know me. I knew their fathers probably, and so everything works. And it's just it's a pace, it's relationships, continuity that I like. But I'm very happy when I'm other places too, and seeing my friends there. Well, a typical day, I don't have any special time I get to the office, but normally I get up a little before 7. I happen to get up at 4:30 this morning, so sometimes I wake up early and I do a lot of reading then too. But I'll get up, but I'll read the papers at home almost always. So I may get to the office this morning. I happen to get here at 6:30 because I got up very early and I read all the papers and still got here early. But it doesn't really make any difference because I can think about the same things at the office. Or I have very few appointments. I'm the least scheduled guy you'll find in my position, and I like it that way. But I get here to the office, and I've read some of the papers. I read more papers. I read mail. I don't do email myself, but it comes from my assistant, and that keeps it down. And I sit and read all day. We don't have any committees at Berkshire. We don't have a committee. We don't have a PowerPoint. We don't have any of that sort of thing. We don't have a public relations department. We don't have investor relations. We don't have a general counsel. We don't have a human relations department. We've got 300 and some thousand employees around the world, and we're probably third or so in market value, maybe fourth in the world. But we just don't go for anything that people do just as a matter of form. And I've got an office I like, and that goes on. And some days I go home at 5. Sometimes I go home 5:30 or 6, and I come down on Saturdays usually. But I come down mid-morning maybe, and usually go to lunch with somebody in the office, and there'll be 4 or 5 people in. And if there's a football game, I may watch it on TV at the office, and I'll watch a lot of football games or whatever it may be, sports events, maybe in the afternoon while at the same time thumbing through other things. And it's exactly the life I like. I think it was about 1992 that shortly after I met Bill Gates, I was out at with his parents, and they had some other guests. And Bill's dad asked each of us, and there were probably 20 or so, to write down on a piece of paper one word that would best describe what had helped us the most. And Bill and I, without any collaboration at all, each wrote the word focus. And I would say my partner Charlie Munger is an extreme example of focus. But that's why Tiger Woods hit 10,000 putts too, or Roger Federer's. but spending 3 or 4 hours a day hitting a golf ball, or some pianist has been spending 5 hours a day practicing. I mean, focus is just bearing down on something that in my case, and I think probably the case of most people that are reasonably good at what they do, that they enjoy. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do it if it was work. So it's a natural. It is not. I say to myself, I'm going to focus on this or do anything of the sort. It's just a natural behavior, and it's been that way ever since I was a kid. But kids focus. I mean, the best kid at baseball in 8th grade is taking a lot of swings out there, or he's. I think Bill Bradley told me he used to shoot baskets 5 or 6 hours a day because he figured some other guy was doing it 4 hours a day. But he enjoyed it too, and it's the same way with me. I can't tell you the color of the walls in my bedroom or my living room, or the color of the carpet in my living room. One time when I worked at home, I worked in this little sewing room sort of off the bedroom, and at one point my wife put in this wallpaper with this bright red and had dollar bills on it or something. She found it someplace. And a couple of years later, I said to her, I said, that new wallpaper is terrific. And she said, it's been there a couple of years. I just don't, I don't see things like that. I'm not colorblind or anything, but it's just not something that grabs me. And on the other hand, I'll remember a number sometimes a long, long time. My partner Charlie Munger would be the same way. I mean, and Bill Gates would be the same way. I've got a lot of friends that they get so darned interested in what they're working on. They don't see other things. That makes me easy to live with in some ways. I mean, you can sort of get away with anything around me. Well, it's very difficult to say. I grew up in a middle-class family, basically. My dad lost his job in 1931, a year after I was born. I lost all his savings, and only the fact that his father had a grocery store kept eating it. Nevertheless, my father went on to have another child a year or two later. I mean, he was an optimist. He believed very much in having an inner scorecard and never worry about what other people are thinking about you. You know, just if you know why you're doing what you're doing, that's good enough. And he read a lot. He was an introvert to some degree. He liked people, but he also liked just sitting and reading, liked talking with the kids. And so he was a sensational teacher over the years. But we were learning how he saw life, and it made a lot of sense to us. So we started seeing life the same way. And he always emphasized that it's your inner scorecard that counts. Don't worry about what the rest of the world thinks. He was probably a little bit better than that than any of his kids were, but it sunk in. My mother was very smart and cared a lot about her children, but she'd had a very, very tough childhood. Her mother ended up in a mental institution, and one of her sisters joined it. The other sister committed suicide. Her brother, who was a superstar, died at about age 30. So that she'd had a tough life, and so she was very dutiful about taking care of the kids, but you didn't get the same feeling of love. It was there, but it didn't come out the same way as with my dad. She would have, I think she would have what would be known as migraines now. I don't think they even called them migraines in those days, but she would experience terrific headaches, and you didn't want to be around her when she was having the headaches. And she would lash out more. She would never do it in public, and she worshipped my dad. So he was a calming force if he was around. But of course he wasn't around during the day when you were a little kid. So you didn't want to be around when my mother had a migraine. But you probably I could be sympathetic to that. Well, she certainly was concerned in the sense that she had one exterior. She had one personality when other people were around, and sometimes she had a different personality when they weren't around. I mean, she did not show that other personality when the other people were around. But I'm not sure how much. I don't know what kind of pain she was actually in, so it's hard to evaluate precisely. What was the motivation for the behavior. I think it had a lasting impact on all three of us. Sure. It may have helped. I may have compensated in some other ways. I mean, I've often thought that I've had so much luck in the world that most of the things I did that were wrong have turned out pretty well, including, when I went through a period where I got very rebellious when I was 13 or so. But I may have compensated by going out and delivering 500 papers a day. And if you translate that to the present day, I made a penny a paper, but in terms of compounding, that penny turned into something else. Well, I never saw him do anything that you couldn't put on the front page of the paper, no, he was probably the best teacher without attempting to be a teacher. With all three of us kids. So we all grew up knowing that we had unconditional love from my dad. That doesn't mean he thought we could get away with everything. There were times when I felt his disapproval, but he had a terrific way of showing his disapproval. I mean, he would basically, and he had plenty of reasons for having disapproval too, but he basically would just essentially say, I know you can do better than that. He had his own way of saying it, but he didn't, and I don't think I ever heard him raise his voice, in my lifetime. But you knew if he was disappointed with you, and that would have a big effect with all three of us actually, but including me. I wanted to please my dad more than I wanted to please my mother. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we all did. And we knew, incidentally, we didn't have to do a lot to do that. We just had to do our best. He never attempted in any way to steer me into any kind of activity. He encouraged me to go to college when I didn't want to go to college. But in terms of whether I was, if you'd asked him his preference, he never would have said it to me. But he probably would have liked me to be a preacher or something of the sort. But he did not try and steer me in any direction, and even in terms of, later on in terms of getting married or anything of the sort, he was just for me, and it's a great feeling. Well, of course, I was born in 1930. I was conceived during the crash, so I actually owe my existence because my dad was a stock salesman, and by November of 1929, when I was conceived, there was no sense calling on people to try and sell them stocks. So I think he was probably just staying home, and there wasn't any television in those days. So here I am. So I probably owe my existence to the stock market crash. But my dad had a heart attack very young, around that period. I don't know the exact time, but he basically felt if you did your best, things would work out. And the bank where he was working closed. I think it was the day before his birthday, in August 12th, in 1931. And he had what little savings he had in the bank. He owed $55 a month on a mortgage on the house we had. And, but he, I don't know this, but I just know from his behavior subsequently and everything I've heard, he wasn't discouraged. I mean, and like I say, he went on to have a third child, and he worked right through the Depression. Started his own company because he had no place to go. He couldn't get a job anyplace, so he started his own company, originally called Buffett Slenica and Company. I think Slenica put up a little money because my dad didn't have any. And that company continued. I eventually went to work with it. It was always a small company. He never made lots of money. We never belonged to a country club. We never had a second car, any of that sort of thing. But we lived fine. And about 1936, we moved into a nicer house, and it was a middle class sort of living, and that's the way he wanted to live. I think probably that the fact that my dad was optimistic would have had a big effect on me because I admired everything about him. So to the extent that I was absorbing lessons from him without knowing it, I probably came about that. I don't know how much of being optimistic is, I've got every reason to be optimistic. For one thing, I've been healthy all my life pretty much, despite the fact that I eat like a 6-year-old, and I've had terrific friends throughout my life. It'd be kind of hard. If I was anything but optimistic, there'd be something wrong with me. But I do think certainly being around an optimistic father, he didn't care about money at all. I mean, he wanted to have enough money so his family could live fine, but it meant nothing to me. He was kind of entertained by the fact that I liked to make money, but his optimism reflected itself in the fact that he believed that that all three of his kids would do terrifically. Although, like I say, the expectations for girls then were entirely different than for boys. But I had no doubt that he thought that I was going to be a huge success. I was pretty standard. I like to read more than most kids, and I really like to read a lot. my eyesight was bad. I didn't know that for a while, but it never slowed me down. But I like sports, and I was average. I was never good. I was never terrible. So I never would have been the first guy chosen, but I never would have been the last guy chosen for basketball or baseball or whatever it might have been. And when the time came, I liked girls, and it was pretty normal that way. Except we did move to Washington when I was 12 or so, when my dad got elected to Congress, and that disrupted my life. And for a period, I was very rebellious after that. I mean, I felt that I was doing fine in Omaha, and all my life, everything was going well, and then we moved to a different environment, and I behaved very badly there for a while. Not too long, but long enough to probably cause my parents some worry. Well, at school, I just lost interest. I mean, I took pleasure in tormenting my teachers. I mean, at that time, for example, AT&T was the stock that all teachers owned for their retirement, paid $9 a year dividend. It was the ultimate safe stock. So the teachers all owned it. So my teachers found me a big pain in the neck, but they did think I knew a lot about stocks. In fact, and so I shorted 10 shares of AT&T and then brought the confirmation to school and showed these teachers that I was shorting the stock they were counting on for their retirement. I was a real pain in the neck for a while. And there was a period, actually, there was one short period where I think it was the English class, they actually put me in a special room. I was kind of like Hannibal Lecter, and they shoved the things in under the door, But that didn't last too long. My dad at one point, this went on for 6 months. I stole things then. I mean, I didn't steal them because I wanted to do it. I just stole them because the guys I was hanging out with were stealing things. And I liked these fellows, and they liked me. But my dad at one point said, you can do better than this. And he may have thrown in the fact that I think you'll have to give up your paper routes if you keep behaving this way. And so I shaped up. I ran away, yeah. When I was at the low point, sort of, I decided I would run away. But I was kind of a coward about it. So I talked two other guys, John McRae and Roger Bell, into running away with me. And so we went out. We got on Wisconsin Avenue out near Western Avenue, and we started hitchhiking. First guy that picked us up, we got in the car, three of us hitchhiking, and we asked him where he was going. He said, I'm going to hell. Do you want to come along? And at that point, the whole adventure was sort of tapering out. But so I got out of there as fast as I could. But we got to Hershey, Pennsylvania. One of the guys had some thoughts about the fact that Hershey was sort of nirvana, and we could go to the Hershey plant. They give us free Hershey bars, and they had an amusement park there. And then we got picked up by the highway patrol in Pennsylvania, and that scared the hell out of us. They took us down to the highway patrol headquarters, and we could hear this teletype in the background. We were lying to these highway patrolmen about how the fact we had our parents' permission and everything, and we were afraid that teletype was sending out an all points alert, pick these guys up. So we got out of Hershey as fast as we could, and finally we got back to Washington. Roger Bell's father was a congressman too, and Roger Bell's mother actually was in the hospital. He cashed in his what were then called war bonds to have the money to finance his part of things, and she was, and I think he wanted to go to Stanton Military Academy, and I think he ended up winning that. I walked in the door, and the first thing my mother said to me was, "How come he came back so soon?" Which was a little deflating. So that was the last time I ran away. Bad. Socially, when I left Omaha, I was in 8th grade, and I was doing okay socially in Omaha. But when I moved to Washington, they were at a different point, sort of, in social development at that point. And I was the youngest one always in the class because I'd skipped. So I was sort of out of the swing of things there for a while. I went to my 60th reunion of Wilson High, and there's a girl there named Barbara Wiegand. She's got a married name now, but I took her out one time to the Uptown Theater in Washington, and I asked her whether she remembered what movie we saw, and she said, no, I don't remember that. And then she said, but I do remember one thing. And like an idiot, I said, what was that? And Barbara said, well, you picked me up in a hearse. And it was true that I owned a half interest in a hearse when I was in high school, which was not the smoothest thing, or coolest, as they would say now, the thing that you could do on a date. Yeah, well, when I was very young, I was probably only 10 or so at that time, but this was before I moved to Washington. I did work at my grandfather's grocery store, and there was a fellow named Eddie that was the oldest driver. We had 7 orange trucks at the grocery store. It was a credit and delivery store, and so I would be his helper. And people would phone in their orders, and then I would load the truck in reverse order of how we were going to deliver it. And Eddie would tell me how to load the truck. So I went out with him the first day. I loaded the truck, like he said, and we started out, and our first stop was in Benson. And then we went for our second stop was in Dundee, and then we went back to Benson, which was a couple miles away again. Then we went to Central Omaha, then we went back to Benson again. And I couldn't take it after a while. I said, Eddie, you know, I'm only 10, but this is the craziest route I've ever seen. I said, let me redesign this, and we can get this done with half the mileage. And Eddie gave me this disgusted look, and I thought Eddie was 120, then he was probably about 10 years younger than I am now. But Eddie gave me this look, and he said, Warren, don't you understand? He said, Mrs. Call is the best looking woman on the route, and if we get there early enough, she may not be dressed. And he said, and then Mrs. Code is the second best looking, and if we get there. And I felt so sorry for this woman that was last on the route. I mean, by definition, she was in bad shape. But I learned a little bit about business then, and sometimes how the employee's interests can differ from those of the employer. I've always been competitive, but sometimes it doesn't pay to be competitive if you're in the wrong game. I was in one boxing match when I was about 10 or something like that, and after the first round, I don't think I could lift the gloves. But fortunately, the other guy was in the same position, so it didn't make much difference. It was not a formal household. And a good bit of the time it was a happy household, and some of the times it wasn't, but most of the time it was. And there was a lot of entertaining in the home in those days. I mean, nobody had much money, so there were bridge clubs, for example, and I always did very well with older people. I mean, I liked my dad's friends, and then I used to walk over to a church for choir practice. I was in a kids' choir when I was 10 or 11, and on the way back, I'd always stop at about 10 houses and talk to various housewives that I knew through my mother or my dad, and there was a lot of sociability, and we had a ping pong table in the basement, and all of my dad's friends that would come over, they'd all take me on in ping pong. I was reasonably good at that, and there was a lot of that sort of thing. So there was a lot of sociability that way that didn't cost any money, basically. And we had a good time. There was a lot of singing. We had a little organ that my mother played. My dad and mother were both quite religious, and so it was mostly, it was almost exclusively church hymns. So I still know the words to some of those old church hymns. It didn't have much effect on me. I was in the kids choir at Dundee Presbyterian Church, and my wife and I taught a Sunday school right there, class right after we got married for a while, and then I think one of the people in one of the other classes heard too much laughter coming out of our class. We were having a very good time, and so I think they decided that they could use a new faculty at that point. I didn't want to go to college. I was 16 when I got out of high school. I was making I probably was making $150 a month or something like that, delivering papers, which only took a couple hours in the morning. I had this half interest in a pinball machine route with a buddy of mine. I liked to go to the horse races and handicap horses, and I really felt that I didn't really need much more than that. And I was buying stocks. I mean, I read the Wall Street Journal every day, and I did a lot of charting of stocks and that sort of thing then. And I actually was having a pretty good time, and I didn't see that it was really was much to be gained by going to college. But my dad kind of jollied me into it, and I think he probably, they didn't have SAT, at least we didn't use SATs in those days, but I think he probably would have taken the test for me if need be. So he suggested that I apply to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and if I didn't like it, I could quit. And a year went by, and I got very good grades in college. I mean, my grades improved as I went along in school, and but I didn't feel I was learning that much there, because I had mostly graduate students as professors, and they were just staying a chapter ahead of me in the book. And so I asked my dad if I could quit then, and he said, well, give it another year. So I gave it another year, and still felt the same way. So he said, well, do what you want to do. So I actually transferred to the University of Nebraska, and that way I finished in 3 years, because I had enough credits that I could get out in 3 years, and I was in a hurry. I wanted to get out. I'm doing a disservice to those schools, because I did learn a fair amount there. And I would say that the University of Nebraska, actually, my year there, I learned fully as much as I was learning at Wharton, which had a much bigger reputation. One day, I was reading the Daily Nebraskan, which was the college newspaper, and it said in room 300 or something at 3 o'clock, they're going to award the scholarship of $500 to go to a graduate school of your choice. So I showed up there, and I was the only guy that showed up, and these professors wanted to keep waiting for other people to show up. I said, wait a second, it said 3 o'clock. So I got the scholarship unopposed, and I applied to the Harvard Business School. My dad was suggesting that to him, and anything my dad wanted me to do, in the end, I usually went along with. I mean, and he never pushed me hard, but if I knew he wanted me to do something, I was very inclined to go along. So I applied, and then I went to. They told me to go to Chicago to get interviewed by this fellow that ran a country day school near Chicago. So I got on Burlington train and rode for 10 hours to Chicago, and then I got another little interurban train, rode up to this day school, and the guy interviewed me for about 10 minutes, and he basically said, find something else. So I reversed the process, spent 10 or 12 hours getting back, thinking, what am I going to tell my dad? And it all worked out, because they did turn me down, but then I was at the University of Omaha that summer, and I was leafing through a catalog of other schools, because I did have this $500 that they were going to give me from Nebraska to go to a graduate school. And I saw these names of Graham and Dodd, who had written this masterpiece of a book in 1934, and it was now 1950. And I had no idea that they were teaching or anything. And I saw that Dave Dodd was the associate dean, I think it was, at Columbia. So I wrote him a letter, and I think it was probably August by then, and I said, Dear Dean Dodd, I said, I thought you guys were dead, but now that I know you're alive, I'd really like to come and study under you. And so he got me in, and he turned out to be a wonderful, wonderful friend. I mean, he would take me to dinner there, and he treated me like a son. It was a marvelous experience. Well, when I was at Columbia, I had been terrified of public speaking all of the time prior. Well, I don't know when it started. It must have started, maybe I had some terrible experience. I can't remember, in grade school. But I was terrified. I couldn't do it. I'd throw up. And so I avoided classes where I would be expected to do that. And I was fine if I wasn't on stage. I mean, I did a lot of talking otherwise. But so when I was at Columbia, I saw an ad for a Dale Carnegie course in Midtown, New York. And I went down, and I wrote a check to take the course. And then right after I got up to this little apartment I was paying $10 a month for on Claremont Avenue, I stopped payment on the check, and I just didn't have the guts to go through with it. And then when I got out of school, I came back to Omaha. I'm now 20 years old. I'm going to sell stocks to people that are 50 or 60. And I didn't even look 20, and I just knew I had to be able to get so I could speak in front of people better. So I saw an ad that at the Rome Hotel here in Omaha on 16th Street that they were going to have a Dale Carnegie course. And I went down, and a fellow named Wally Keenan, who later became a very good friend and a partner in my investment partnership, but who I'd never met before, was the teacher. And I handed him $100 in cash. And if I parted with $100 in cash, I knew I was going to follow through. So we took that Dale Carnegie course, and there were about 30 of us, and we couldn't say our own name in public at the start. They made us do all these crazy things to get out of ourselves, and so we stood on tables and did all kinds of things. And it worked. And as soon as I got out of that class, I went right out to the University of Omaha and said, I want to start teaching because I want to get in front of people and force myself to keep doing it. And that's why I can't stop talking now. It was during the class, incidentally, they gave a pencil every week for the person who'd done the most with what they'd learned the week before. And during that class, I proposed to my wife to be, and she accepted. So when I told that story the following week when we met, I won the pencil. Well, she was 19 when we got married, and I was 21, and but she was so much more mature than I was. There's no comparison, and she really put me back together. I was very good at a lot of things. I mean, in terms of business, for my age, but on the other hand, I was kind of a lopsided character. I'm still lopsided in some ways, but now I'm lopsided in ways I like. And I was in those days I was lopsided in some ways I didn't like. So she really put me together. She was there with a little watering can, pouring it on me, and it she's responsible for well, I would have accomplished nothing without her. Yeah, I mean, she was incredibly empathetic, and everybody. She was non-judgmental. It wasn't that she didn't have standards, but she just was non-judgmental about people, and she felt every person, again, was the moral equivalent of every other person. She was interested in every person individually. We once went to a football game in Seattle. University of Washington was playing Nebraska, and at halftime, I went down to get a hot dog and a Coke, and she went with me, and there was a line of about 4 people there, and I got in line, and 5 minutes later, I had my Coke and my hot dog in hand, and I went back, and she was waiting a few feet away, and there was a woman standing next to her, and this woman was, at that point, was saying, now, I've never told this to anybody else in my life. This is a woman, that woman was not there when I went to get the hot dog. People just, they opened up to her. She had more people probably that considered her their best friend than anybody I've ever known. Well, I was very focused. I was into my work big time, and so she did most of the work by far of bringing up the children, which was probably a good thing. They have more of her qualities than mine, which I would recommend. I told my dad, leave me out of his will. I don't need the money. I'm gonna, I knew I was gonna get rich, so I told him just to have my sisters. So I was a trustee for my mother, and then subsequently for my sisters. But no, I was not. I did not become the central figure in the family at all. My politics became more overt after my dad died. But he died at age 60, so he was young. I was 33 at the time. But my life didn't change dramatically. We incidentally, I mean, we lived here in Omaha. We lived a block and a half from Susie's parents, and we lived about 2 miles from my parents. So the whole family was pretty much here in Omaha, including some aunts and uncle. I was not much of a disciplinarian. I tried. I didn't. It wasn't a question of trying. It was just natural. But I tried to behave with my kids like my dad had behaved with me. I mean, I never tried to steer them into anything, because I just cherished the fact that my dad had supported me so much in anything I did. So I've got 3 very different kids, and they've got a common heart, which they got from their mother. But I have never felt that it was important that they come into Berkshire Hathaway or that they do what I do. That's crazy, you know. I mean, they're each one have individual talents, and I certainly wouldn't want to try and take up what they do. I've got one son that farms. I'm not much for manual labor, but so why should they do what I do? I mean, it's never made any sense to me. So I'm sure I brought to the raising of kids what I thought were the better parts of, without doing it consciously, but what I thought were the better parts of the way I was raised. It worked well, but I don't think it'll work for lots of other people necessarily. But it worked very well. I mean, we loved each other, and we both, we not only loved each other, we admired each other, and we were totally in sync with what the other was doing, but we were two different individuals. It wasn't hard for me. I mean, they were still part of our lives. You want them to do that, so that was not hard for me. It goes back to that, was it Oscar Hammerstein, you know, that a bell's not a bell till you ring it, a song's not a song till you sing it. Love in the heart isn't put there to stay. Love isn't love till you give it away. It's a very strange thing, love. You can't get rid of it. If you try to give it out, you get more back. If you try to hang on to it, you lose it. And it's something like, there may be other things like that, but I can't think what they are. Understanding about human behavior and all of that, if you're observant at all, and you've had a long lifetime and you had all kinds of experiences, you learn a lot about human behavior. I think you recover. How did I recover from my dad's death or anybody else? And, you know, or just a good friend that died, a very good friend a week ago. You know, you go on, but that Susie she spent more time probably with dying people than about anybody that wasn't in the medical profession. I mean, she helped people die, and she helped my friend Joe Rosenfield, who was a man, he was one of my heroes, one of her heroes too, and he lived to be in the high 90s. He was a marvelous man. I mean, he's a real model for anybody. And but by the time he died, I mean, he had no wife, no child anymore, and she was there when he died. And she did that for dozens of people. Well, Ostrich had lived with me for a long time, and you know, Susie put me together. Ostrich kept me together, and she's been doing it ever since. And she takes care of me like nobody else could take care of me, and not just physically. I don't mean that. I mean just in all ways. Well, it's the best mental game I know, aside from business, which I think is kind of an interesting mental game too. But it's, you know, you're going to play a hand every 7 or 8 minutes, and you are going to be facing something where every hand you've played in the past has got some utility in evaluating the present hand, but you'll never play the same hand twice. You're playing it with a partner, so it's a game where partnership dynamics are very important. It's a game where every card played you can draw, or every bid made or not made, or every card played or not played, you can draw inferences from. So it is, I regard it as absolutely the most fascinating game there is. I'm not that good at it, but, and I think that, I can't think of a better form of mental exercise. And, you know, I hope I'm playing it when I'm 100 years old. I probably spend at least 10 hours a week playing bridge on the computer, and I enjoy every minute of it. I'm not frugal in the sense, I buy anything I want, I buy. And if I thought I would enjoy a $200 dinner better than a hamburger, I get it. I'd buy it. But on Sunday, I frequently take out my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. I've got 9 great-grandchildren, and 7 of them live in this area. And we go to Dairy Queen. Now, we don't go to Dairy Queen because Berkshire owns it. We don't go to Dairy Queen because you don't run up a big bill. We go to Dairy Queen because I'd rather eat their food than anybody else's. And the rest of them do too. So I have never, maybe go back to when I was 15 or something, but basically I've never denied myself anything I wanted. And the plane is very useful to me. And it enables me to do things that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And it's a lot more comfortable, and so it doesn't make any difference what it costs, because money has no meaning to me anymore. So if something costs me $1 million and I'm going to really get something out of it, I'll do it. But there's I can't think of what, money certainly doesn't buy love. It'll buy sex, buy recognition. You can get your name on a building if you want to write a big enough check, but there's no way it can buy love. It can buy testimonial speeches, but so most things, there are very few things that require money. A plane requires money, so but I could have multiple houses, but my life would be worse rather than better. I have all kinds of friends that have multiple houses, and basically they become like a hotel manager, and they have to plan what people want. I don't want to do all that. Well, my wife and I, first wife Susie, when we were in our 20s, talked about what we do with money. I kept telling her I'd make a lot of money, and she humored me. She didn't really care, and whether she believed me or not, she believed me on things generally. So she probably believed me, but it didn't really make that much difference. But it did make a difference what we were going to do with the money after we made it. So we actually set up a foundation over 50 years ago. I just looked back at the records the other day, and I think we set it up in 1964. And we always said that we were going to give away, if I made a lot of money, which I was convinced I would, that we would end up giving it away. We'd have everything we wanted, and we would leave our children. Originally, the idea was enough so they could do anything, but not enough so they could do nothing. That was a line that actually Katharine Graham gave to me, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're very wealthy, it's crazy to have your kids out there in rags or something of the sort, but it's also crazy to have them so they never have to lift a finger the rest of their life. So over time, we gave them some money, but in my entire lifetime, everything that I've spent, my wife spent, and my kids have spent that came from me will be quite a bit less than 1% of everything I make. The other 99% plus will go to others because it has no utility to me, and my kids have all they need. They each run a foundation which I fund, and they do a terrific job doing it, and they each in their own way they do it, and they work hard at it, and they live pretty much normal lives. I mean, they're not driving around. I gave them probably, I don't know how many years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, I started giving a few hours on the plane, but not enough so that they could go crazy on it. But so I've softened up some on that, but I couldn't be more pleased with how the whole subject of money has worked out in our family. I thought I would pile it up over the years, and that I would be sort of a compounding machine to build up a whole lot of money, and then she would unpile it in terms of running one very large foundation. And she was younger, just a couple years younger than I was, and women live longer, so I thought the odds were very good that she would disperse it, and that it would be much better to give away many, many billions later on than give away a few millions early on, and that I was particularly good at compounding money, and therefore society would benefit by waiting. And she didn't want to wait as much as I did, but she never quite appreciated compounding like I did. So it worked out, and then she died 10 years ago, and so I had to change my plans then. But that was the original plan. And she did run the foundation for a long time, and she gave away significant money. And when she died, I'd given her $22,000 over the first few years of our marriage, just because I thought she ought to have it in her own name. And she left a $3 billion estate, and 97 or so percent, 98% of that money went to the foundation. And so we always figured that the money could do a lot of good, and that a lot of money could do possibly a whole lot more good, and that she was better at giving away money than I would be, and I was better at piling it up than she would be. So the whole thing made sense to both of us. I'm giving it to 5 foundations, and the Gates Foundation is the largest, but the money has gotten to a scale where very few operations could really handle it. But I doubled the amount that I give to each one of the 3 children's foundations. So they're getting, at present prices for Berkshire, they're getting close to 125 or 100, probably closer to 150 million of stock a year, and they got to keep spending it. Then there's the Susan Buffett Foundation, which was originally, we had intended to be the whole thing. That's the one we set up 50 years ago. And that's got quite a bit more money in. And then the largest is the Gates Foundation, who have the same feeling that I do, that every human life is of equal value. And so I feel very good about what's being done with the money. The money has no utility to me. It can't make me happier. Can't make me, in any way. And probably can make me miserable if I did certain things with it. And it has utility to other people if properly used. So I've got a solution that fits exactly the objectives that we started with 60 years ago or so. I'm a wholesaler in a sense, in terms of giving it away, but I've got an older sister, Doris, who's known as the Sunshine Lady, and she spends all day, every day, giving away money at retail, and she's done a terrific job at it. And I send her all the letters I get, and she looks into each individual case. She doesn't give money to each individual case, but she evaluates them, and she helps people, and she gives them, she's their friend too, in addition to small checks that she gives out. But you can't get rid of the money that I've got doing that. I love the fact she does it, and I support her in a small way, but I have to do things at scale. And having a solution where I feel good about the people, feel good about what's being done, and has the ability to do big things, makes me, that's exactly what I intended the money to do all along. Both, probably, because Bill and I and Melinda have worked on developing the Giving Pledge. I think actually that will be, I think that will have quite an impact over the decades. I think 50 years from now, the Giving Pledge will be looked at as a really important move, and will affect the level of philanthropy particularly by the very wealthy in this country. So I think that'll be a factor, and I hope that Berkshire Hathaway is something that people study in terms of a business operation. Very wealthy people, they vary, just like very poor people vary in their emotions and motivations and everything. But one problem that they often have, is that they don't have many peers to talk to when you get into the question of their children, for example, or philanthropy or whatever it may be. They may have a lawyer they talk to, but they don't just want to go out and talk to anybody about it. So Bill and I have found in the Giving Pledge that when we open up the conversation, they really like to talk. And the first meeting we had, we asked David Rockefeller if he would host in New York City, and he was very gracious about it, and put together a group of, we put together the group. He held the dinner of 15 or 20 people. And I started by asking one couple that were there, and these were all very well-known names. And I said, tell me about how you came about your philosophy of giving. Well, we went around that table, and it was a couple of hours later before people finished talking. They wanted to talk about it, but it wasn't something they were going to talk about in the neighborhood, or anything of the sort. And many of them had different, over the years, as we talked to more people, have all different kinds of family situations, and some of them have been very disappointed with their kids, and some of them feel terrific, and some of them find the kids want the money, and others the kids want philanthropy. And but from that came the idea that we might develop something in the way of both being smarter about philanthropy and getting people perhaps engaged in it younger and in a bigger way by organizing an entity that would focus on that. And so the Giving Pledge came out of that. And there was a need for it. I mean, it isn't that it's changed the behavior of loads of people. Most of the people overwhelmingly in the Giving Pledge were philanthropically inclined beforehand. They were going to do it. I think some of them are doing it sooner. I think some of them are doing it bigger. And in a few cases, and they've told me, and in fact, I've got letters at the office, they've told me that it really did change how they thought about things. It clarified their own thinking. Had one case where one of the parents was somewhat reluctant to do it, and the kids talked him into doing it, which was remarkable. And I think it's done wonders in a family when that happens. Well, the big answer is you're in the right place if you're in America, and you don't have to be particularly smart. You just have to be patient. And the biggest thing in making money is time. And I've had this long run, and so the compounding at the end turns into very big numbers. But if you would, well, the start of the 20th century, the Dow Jones average was at 66, and it ended at 11,400. And that was with the Great Depression and world wars and flu epidemics and everything else. So you've got a tailwind in this country if you just own a cross section of it. One big thing is keeping down expenses, and the other thing is not trying to pick one stock, but owning a large group of stocks and buying it over time, and then just sitting and paying no attention to people who say they know when to buy and sell stocks or buy and sell this individual stock. So it's a very simple game where the person who doesn't try to do very much usually does better than the person who spends a lot more energy on it. It's been 50 years since May 10th, 1965, that I formally took control of Berkshire Hathaway. It was done through a partnership that I ran, a bunch of people that joined me, and I ran the money. And it started as a textile company, doomed to fail. And step by step, and we've created something that is kind of what I dreamt we might create over time, but it took a lot of time to do it. It never seemed like we were making that much progress on any one day, but compound interest works. How can you look at a country? Just anybody watching this, if they walk out their door and think of what was there in 1776, there's a bunch of trees, probably. There wasn't anything here. And 4 million people, the first census in 1790, just under 4 million people. And we ended up a few hundred years later with 25% of the world's GDP. Now, something's working. And it isn't because we're a lot smarter than we were then, or that we're working harder. We're not working as hard. But we've got a system that really, really works. It doesn't work for everybody. And that's something to remember. But in terms of overall output, it has worked since 1776, and it'll keep working better and better over the years. Not in a straight line. I mean, it has some fits and starts to it. But this system will turn out more and better goods per capita year after year. In my lifetime alone, one guy, it's gone up 6 for 1 in terms of real GDP per capita since I was born in 1930. And I was born into a pretty good country then. But you can't stop this. You can't stop America. You probably can't stop the world. The world is learning the lessons of, China 40 years ago or so decided to modify their system in a way that unleashed the potential of that population, which before that had not moved. They were just as smart as we were. They worked just as hard, but they weren't getting the results. But now they've just, they're going like gangbusters.